he'll drown. You hear the cries of men caught like that. But that was later. Frederick died before the worst of the mud. I have a calendar on my wall, and I mark off the days. I keep records of how many rows I've planted. Early potatoes, turnips, carrots, beetroot, spring cabbages, and all the rest. This mild spring has made the earth soft and ready. I've planted gooseberry bushes, because they'll stand the wind. Mary Pascoe made hedging around her vegetable patch. She didn't look after her cottage. She stuffed her windows with rags and let birds nest in the chimney. But she always knew how to make her bit of land feed her. She left me the cottage and the land around it, which maybe never belonged to her at all, but which she'd made her own. Why shouldn't she have a bit of land? My mother used to say, when there's others that own half the country. Mary Pascoe left me a goat and her chickens. She used to keep a pig, she said, but I don't remember that. I knew her more than the other children did because of my mother's friendship for her. I'd seen her striding into town with a basket of eggs on her strap. Sometimes Frederick and I met her on the shore, picking mussels, when we were walking out to Sonera or beyond. Me and Frederick, side by side, swinging out. We had bread and cheese in our pockets, and he might have brought chocolate or a handful of plums. He shared between us so easy that you couldn't tell what was his and what was mine. I never met anyone else who had that gift, until I was in the army. We had poetry books, or rather Frederick brought them from his father's library, and I read them. Frederick was going to be a lawyer. He stayed on at school, gone up country to Truro for his education, and then farther still to boarding school. I left school when I was 11, a year before I ought to have done, but in the circumstances a blind eye was turned. My mother needed my wages. She had no other family to provide for her. For years, when I was a child, she went out to clean in the big houses. Lezard House, 4 or 5 of the houses along the row, Carrick House in the summer season, when the family that owned it were down from London. When I was 10, she had rheumatic fever, and after that she didn't have the strength for cleaning. She was soon out of breath walking uphill, no matter how slowly she went. Sometimes she had to lean on me. I hated it. I'd like to think I gave her my arm willingly, but the truth is that her weakness frightened me and made me ashamed of us, the two of us, when I wanted to be proud. Bolts of shame would go through me as we struggled up the hill, like flies in milk. I remember how I knelt on the bare boards of the bedroom on the night my mother was so ill that she didn't know I was in the room. I'd never known her not to come to me at the lightest sound, if I woke from a bad dream, but now she didn't know me. Her eyes went beyond me. She was talking all the time, in a low, quick mutter, but not to me. I heard my father's name and my grandmother's. She cried out for them once, her voice rusty and tearing, and she tried to heave herself off the pillow. But Mrs. Gelbert held her. I sank down to the floor and pressed my face into the quilt. All the prayers I'd ever been taught jumbled in my mouth. "You go on downstairs, boy," said Mrs. Gelbert, but I couldn't. "Don't you fear, my child. We'll slock her round." I was beyond believing her. A black wind of terror blew through me, and I prayed for my mother until sweat trickled down my back. No one answered me. Nothing spoke. Mrs. Gelbert sent a boy for Dr. Sanders. He came that night and stayed until morning. He refused to let her die, even though it was clear that she'd left us in her mind. She was with those other ones, those ghosts I'd barely known but who called her more strongly than my own voice could call her. But Dr. Sanders wouldn't let her stay with them. He bent over her, hauling her back, hurting her, I thought, from the way she cried out. I'm not sure that my mother ever came back again, truly, but she was good at pretending. She got better. All through, Dr. Sanders treated her for nothing, and afterwards he bestirred himself to find work for me, and settled it with school that I was to leave early. I was taken on as a gardener's boy at Muller House, 2 miles walk from the town. "You're the man of the house now, Daniel," Dr. Sanders said to me. The doctor called me Daniel in deference to my mother's wish, although most people called me Dan. She always said, "Daniel's his christened name." It may seem strange that a doctor whose house my mother cleaned should show her disrespect, but it was a fact. My mother was always someone you wanted to please. She was dark-eyed and dark-haired, and her face was made so that you had to turn and look at it again, to see what it was that had struck you so. Even I felt it, and I was her son. It was an anguish to me when other people looked at her.